Welcome to this video. My name's Barry Beckham. Why should we shoot raw images? The simple answer is because it allows a much greater exposure latitude. I wonder how many photographers who may be watching this video are confident of getting the exposure right every time and in all conditions. I'm going to make a suggestion that none of us, right? Now, why should that be? It's because the photographic subjects we see with our eyes, and remember, our eyes are not made by Canon or Nikon, they're vastly different and superior to how our camera sees the subject. There is quite a gap between what we see at the time through the viewfinder and the image we manage to capture and see on our computer. And that gap gets wider in high contrast light. But that's another subject, and perhaps for another time. The camera is just a machine, and it's very easily fooled. If we show it a lot of light, it will always underexpose. And of course the reverse is true. Show it a lot of shadow and it'll overexpose every time. Image editing is where we do the fine-tuning of our exposure. We want to get it as good as we can in the camera, but then we can use Photoshop, Lightroom, Photoshop Elements to take us the final distance. Think of it like driving to the supermarket to do the weekly shop. If we can park right outside the store, well, we have 99% of our job done. We only need to walk 1% of the distance. So the shop is easier, it's quicker, and it's more convenient. If we only drive 50% of the way and now we have to walk the rest, it's certainly not easier, it takes a lot of time, and it certainly isn't convenient. Now, we've really just described exposure and shooting raw. Get it right and there's only a little bit of work left for us to do. Get it wrong and there's a whole lot of work to do. Who's more likely to get the exposure wrong? Those with less experience perhaps? Beginners? Amateur photographers? So who most needs the greater exposure latitude of raw shooting? I think the answer is pretty obvious. Let me try and take some mystery out of this question. If you shoot JPEGs, the images are captured raw. But as they're saved to the media card in your camera, they are edited by the camera's software. Color, contrast, sharpness is likely to be adjusted, and then it's locked and saved into that JPEG. If you shoot RAW, the images are captured raw just like the JPEG. But as they're saved to the media card, they are not edited at all. We save just raw computer data. As I understand it, ones and zeros. Think of your JPEG like a photocopied document. If you then try to make an adjustment to that photocopied document, the quality is almost certain to suffer. Think of your raw file as though you're in front of the word processor with the same document on screen. You can make as many changes as you like, as often as you like, without any effect on the quality at all. Over the years I've used these images to demonstrate this question. If you look at the bottom left corner of these rather large thumbnails, you'll see the one on the right is a RAW file, the one on the left is a JPEG of the one on the right. I want to demonstrate the difference in the latitude of the RAW file. I'm going to begin by opening up the image on the left. Just a quick word about shooting these images before I do. Why are these images so bright? Because I've got close to this jetty, the camera sees rather a lot of shadow. It sees the underside of the jetty, it sees the shadow beneath, and it thinks it needs more exposure than it actually does. and that impacts badly on the areas of the image like the sky, which is already fairly bright. So this is pretty typical of how our cameras can get the exposure wrong, no matter how much we paid for the camera. Let's open up the JPEG into Photoshop and see what we can do. Now, although I'm going to demonstrate using Photoshop, it really has no bearing on what we're talking about here. You could be using Lightroom, Photoshop Elements, or any other software program that supports RAW shooting. I'm going to go to my image menu at the top of the screen, and I'm going to open up my levels. Control L is the shortcut, Image, Adjustment, and Levels. Now over here I've got a shadow slider, a light tone slider, and a mid-tone slider. I can move the shadow in a little bit, and we do improve the shadows nicely. I can have a look at the mid-tone slider, and I can take it to the right to try to do something with the highlights, because I can't move the highlights to the right. It's already too far gone. If I bring the right side slider in, they just get worse. So I only really have these two I can play with, and I can actually destroy the picture before I actually see any detail in many of the areas of this image. Because when it was converted to a JPEG, those areas were locked into the file. What's the best I can get here? I don't know. We're all going to choose something different, but let me just say that that's about the best I can get this image. I'm going to save this so we can compare it to the RAW file in a moment, but then I'm going to go back to Bridge. I'm going to open up my RAW file and we'll have a look at manipulating that. Now when I open up this image into Adobe Camera Raw, but it could easily be Photoshop Elements or Lightroom, as I've said, it looks much the same as the JPEG. What I'm going to do here though is go up to the top right of the screen, the very top right, and I'm going to click a little icon that turns on the clipping warnings, and you'll see a red patch appear in the center of the image. That's telling me that the pixels there have no detail whatsoever. Even the starting point doesn't seem to be anywhere near as bad as the JPEG. But if I try to increase the exposure, you can see it gets far worse. I'll double click to reset that. So what we're going to do is use these sliders to try to bring back as much quality and to get the exposure much closer to what we really need for an interesting image. If we look at the image, and even if we don't take account of the histogram at the top of the screen, we can see that we've got a problem with highlights. So let's go to the highlights here and drop them right the way down. It's helped. It's took away the clipping warning, so we know we've got detail everywhere now. Let's bring down the exposure to put a bit of impact into the picture. Now we've darkened the shadows a little bit, so maybe we can just lift them a touch. We can add perhaps a little bit of clarity, which tends to improve the mid-tone contrast, a little bit of sparkle. Doesn't matter if we jump around here and change the order in which we adjust these sliders. I would probably need a bit more vibrance. And if I just did a little bit of work around the edges of my pictures, just to darken down the left-hand edge, you can see already we've got a far better result. If we think that the JPEG has already been edited, but it's been edited by the software in the camera, so by the time we get to it, all is lost, or it could be, as I've demonstrated with that JPEG we saw a few moments ago. But here it's not, because not only do we get a greater latitude when we shoot and manipulate the images in RAW like this, but we can come back to them at any time and make changes, and as many changes as we like, because until I open this up into Photoshop, I'm still just viewing computer data. It doesn't turn into a picture as we know a picture until we actually see it opened up into Photoshop. It means, of course, that I can even come back another day and change my mind. I may want to step up the clarity, I may want to try a little bit of dehaze, I may want to drop the exposure, I may want to adjust the vibrance. You get the idea. What I'm going to do is open this up into Photoshop, and we'll take a look at the best we've got from this one and the best we got from the JPEG. As we view the image that I've just opened up into Photoshop from Adobe Camera Raw, we can bear in mind that we started off with an image that was quite seriously overexposed, but obviously it was within the limits of shooting RAW. You'll also notice that the changes I made only took a few seconds, didn't take very long at all. I'm going to jump between the edited RAW version and the edited JPEG version automatically within my video recording, so you can compare the two. There's the best we got from the JPEG. Now I think when we jump between the edited JPEG and now we're looking at the edited RAW file, the answer to the question why shoot RAW is pretty obvious. One other thing we may want to consider is that whether we shoot JPEG images or RAW images, we're almost certain to want to do some image editing to those images. If we're going to do any image editing, then we may just as well do it in RAW. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please consider subscribing to my channel. Hit the notification bell so you're informed whenever I post a new video. And if you'd like to learn more about image editing with Photoshop or Lightroom, come along to my website. You'll find I've got lots of videos there.